The only tricky part of this job so far has been getting everything in there flush. So you can tell it's all flush when this hub is sitting deeper than this ring, and there's some grease on here, obviously, because I'm a professional. But this is how you want all this to look. Now I'm going to change the perspective and show you from the side. If yours doesn't look like this, do not try to put your clutch cover on. You will destroy it. It needs to look just like this. You see how much shaft is sticking out here? That is key. So you got this O-ring that you can use to line it up, and there should be that much right there. All right, if it doesn't look like that, you got a problem. If this doesn't look like this, you got a problem. If this isn't sunk down far enough, it means you're not splined with your last clutch. So jiggle it, I took a flat blade and right here and tapped on it. You got to make it look like this before you start reinstalling the cover. You'll destroy it. This is probably the thing everyone's going to screw up. This is why you should take your machine to me to have it worked on. But if you're going to try to do it yourself, I warned you, okay? It's got to look just like this. Got it? All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure why I say that. There's no girls that watch this crap. This is a 4-seater Talon X, and I'm going to pull the clutches out of it and replace them because the clutches are burnt. Before you say, oh, that's harder than changing a belt, the clutches shouldn't have gone out already. It was a unique situation. This thing was pulling this thing out, buried in a pond, and it was late at night, and some mistakes were made, some miscommunications, and the clutches are burned. Okay, so not the machine's fault, and so far, pretty sweet job. So this is the most I got to do on a Talon so far, so obviously I volunteered to do this, especially because it burnt pulling me out. Pulling the rear diff is not something the manual tells you to do. You should 100% do it. It's really easy because it's a Honda and it's made to be worked on. So you pull these 4 bolts out, that gets your trailing arms off. Then you literally just grab the knuckle and go pop, pop, pop until the axle slides out of the diff. Put a pin in the diff to knock the other axle out, or however you want to do it. And then you unbolt a bolt here, bolt and nut. And then there's 2 bolts down through here, right here, that go through the top of the diff. So the diff's mounted really well, and it literally slides out the back of the frame. Nicest thing ever. So now I have tons of room to get to the clutches. Without removing the diff, you gotta work around a lot of stuff, and you don't need working around stuff when you're in a transmission. You want easy access. This is the difference between, well, never mind, I'm not gonna make that joke. Okay, so the clutches are right here. This is the clutch valve body. Don't really have to go through that, right? All you really wanna do is get to your clutches. You just wanna pull the clutch cover, okay? So you see if you took this bolt out, you'd pull the valve body apart. But if you take these bolts out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, up in there, you just have the clutch cover come out. And then you can go through your valve body on the bench. That is how I intend to do this job, and because I removed the diff, I will be able to do that. Now, another way you can do it, the manual says, is to pull this whole tank right here. This is basically just your oil tank and filter housing. There's a couple of bypass valves in here, but there's nothing much to it, right? There's no wires hooked to it, so you can tell nothing smart's going on in here. This is your oil cooler, so if you pull all that, you gotta mess with coolant and all that, and I'd like to leave all that intact if I can. Yes, I'm gonna flush everything thoroughly, but I don't feel the need to go in here. So I'm gonna try to do everything through this clutch gasket here. Now, I have put a little bit of time and thought into this. I have read the manual, like I always do, but there isn't a good video on this particular machine doing what I'm doing yet. So, kind of making this up as I go, but I think this is the way to do it. I'm gonna pull the drive shaft out now. Of course, it's a Honda, so you know, everything's properly sealed and still nice and greasy, very minty. So there's the rear drive shaft. I'll throw that back here with the diff. The hardest part of pulling the diff was getting this plug undone. Not even undone, getting it off the frame, but I left it all intact, so that was pretty sweet. You see these splines are a little dry, so that's a good idea to grease those axle splines so they don't weld themselves in there. Luckily, this is a brand new machine. Oh, here it is. So here's the O-rings you need and other things. All right, pause the video if you really need to read all of that. And don't pay attention to the prices. You probably can't get them that cheap. Okay, need 2 clutches. We're just gonna change the clutch pack that does reverse, first, third, and fifth. That's the one that sits to the outside. So there's 2 clutches in this housing. There's the one clutch here, another clutch here. So we're just gonna change the outside clutch. That's how we're gonna do it. And that'll give us everything we need to get the job done properly. And then of course you gotta flush everything and change all your filters, because when you smoke the clutches in one of these, there'll be a lot of contamination from clutch material. But I think it's gonna be a pretty sweet job. I'll try to make a pretty informative video to remind myself how I do mine when I eventually burn the clutches out of that one. And for all the belt drive guys that says, you should have got a belt drive. It's way easier to change a belt than change the clutches. Well, On a belt drive, your clutches, aka the pulleys, will eventually wear out, and they're just as much work to change. And also, having a paddle shifter where you can control your gear ratio is worth everything. If you guys don't believe me, just wait till you see what Can-Am's about to come out with, all right? Everyone's gonna go to double clutches soon. Giving the driver control of the gear ratio is key for anything that's remotely technical, sporty, or whatever. Belt drives are dead to me. Oh wait, I own one, shit. Talking out my ass again. Get another vehicle as an anchor to a tree. Don't put it in reverse. So this is what happens to the clutch. If you do that, it's totally black. This is supposed to look silver, and it's actually black and it's burnt oil on the outside of it, so it's totally foobar. This is the clutch hub that sits down in there. You can actually see dry, burnt oil on the clutch disc there. So the best way to do this, by far, I don't care what anyone tells you, is remove the rear diff, which is really easy. You just disconnect these two arms, swing those out, pop your axles out, take the diff out, just a couple bolts. I'll show you some more detail on that at the end if you need it. Undo all your wire harnesses. This one's on this side. All these other ones I have right here. All right, get that all out of the way. Those are all bundled up here. You need all that room there to get the cover off. So get all those harnesses out of the way. And then take off your clutch cover. Don't go into the valve body. Leave all these screws in there. Just take off the bolts you see around here. Only way to do it, the clutch will come right out. Now the manual says that because this is a split gear and here off the crankshaft and all these other things that you can't do it this way. Well, I'm here to tell you that's wrong. You can do it this way, and this is the right way to do it. So you can see that my other clutch hub stayed in here. We're gonna go ahead and grab that and pull it out. Pay attention to where that shim is. And that's the clutch area in the motor. It's a big clutch. That's a huge area for the clutch to sit. You don't really realize that's all clutch, right? You can look at this, but that's where it is, it turns out. So this is the back one. This is the front one. It's okay. It is a little blued. If you compare the two, right? You can tell which one was which, but this piece is fine. All we're gonna replace is the clutches, the disc, and the basket. It comes as a unit from Honda. And you must replace these O-rings on the shaft right there. Those are important to replace because they probably got hot during this incident. And then you gotta flush the oil a few times, change the filters, and let it relearn the clutch. But really not that bad of a job. This is the first one I've done. And yeah, it's pretty doable. And is it easier than changing a belt? No, but it's easier than changing a belt that's totally shredded and wound up in the primary and everything else. Definitely easier than that. So if you were to smoke a clutch or smoke a belt, not a huge difference. Probably wouldn't do this on the side of the trailer because you're in the motor, so that's one downside. But like I said, this was the result of operator error. This usually would not happen on a newer Talon like this. It was running 33-inch tires as well. This next part is a little bit tricky. The basket splines are a machine press fit onto those splines like so. So when you take off the old one, you find a way to hold the basket and remove the hub from it. Some people say to use some pry bars or jam a chisel in there. I didn't like any of that. I know this clutch is totally screwed and going in the trash due to how it looks. So I just clamped it in the vise, grabbed a 27mm socket, as you can see that fits in there perfectly, and tapped her on out. Very gently, did not take much, nice small taps. Put one hand here, grabbed it, set it there. Replace these two O-rings there. The part numbers for those O-rings are in the trash. I'll give them to you because I'm a nice guy. That's the part number for those two O-rings. And then tap it back together. And then I'm gonna oil this, let it sit for a while I get everything else prepped up. You gotta replace some O-rings on the crankshaft, or not the crankshaft, the transmission input shaft, which is kind of a pain in the butt. And then after that, then we are ready to reinstall after some flushing. All right, so we replaced the clutch. That's the first, reverse, third, and fifth gear clutch. It's the outer clutch. The inner one was fine. To summarize, we didn't do what the manual says because we're smart. So we didn't mess with the oil tank. All we did was remove the rear diff, remove the clutch cover, valve body as an assembly. We didn't do anything in the valves other than just flush it. We didn't take the valve body apart, and replace the clutch on the bench using two different sockets to separate it. For me, what worked out good was using a vise to hold the bad clutch and knock it out with one socket. That was in my Harbor Freight speak, 27mm fits perfect in there. And then to reinstall it back together, use a 30mm, and it was just a light tapping because that hub is this inner clutch hub is a press fit onto the double clutch assembly. So once you get that done, you install your clutches. The main thing everyone's gonna mess up is making sure the clutch hubs are fully seated all the way through the disc. I have an explanation on that too, but that's all the tricks. And you too can fix clutches in a messed up Talon. As far as braking recommendations, do one ride on your stock tires, an easy ride, and then do an oil change, and then put your 35s back on or whatever you're running. Because obviously you were running 35s to burn your clutches in the first place. But yeah, not a bad job. You have to do a clutch relearn procedure. I'll talk you through that real quick. It's tricky in a Talon that doesn't have a screen. This screen went out. So you see I don't really have any lights to go off of. But the procedure is turn the key to the on position, wait 5 seconds, throttle down, throttle up, throttle down, throttle up, hold the throttle to the floor, then take the shifter and go from park to low, back to park, back to low, back to park, wait a second, release your foot, start the engine, and it'll go into the clutch relearn procedure. If you're gonna attempt any of this, you'd be really dumb to not buy a $20 manual first.